Hey everybody, Jem Schofield here, and welcome to the Canon EOS R5 and R6 video training series. This series is designed to focus on the video-specific features of these cameras, and in this particular video, we're going to focus on both the R5 and the R6 and some of their special video options and features, so let's go. The reason I wanted to create this video in the series was to cover a bunch of small features that I think will help you inside of both the R5 and R6 when you're shooting video with these cameras. Now, everything that I'm going to cover pertains to both of the cameras, with some exceptions. For instance, when we get to the last part of this video and we talk about extracting still images from your recorded images, it's a little bit different between the R5 and the R6. So let's go ahead and start first with one of the tools that I think is going to help you the most. Many of you who are shooting with DSLRs and mirrorless cameras may be used to using a histogram so that you can judge exposure when you are working with your images. If I jump into the menus, you can see that HDR PQ is off, and in the next menu, Canon Log is also off inside of here. So we're essentially using the picture styles as the way that we are affecting the captured image. Also, when HDR PQ and Canon Log are off, we're recording internally at 8-bit 420 as opposed to 10-bit 422. That's covered in the recording options of the two videos in this series for the R5 and the R6. So I'm just going to step out here and take a look at, just so you can see it, what the histogram looks like when we have Canon Log on. So let's take a look at that, and you'll see it has changed considerably in terms of the recorded image to protect those shadows and also the highlights. And I'll just turn this off for now. The first feature I want to talk to you about are zebras, or zebras, depending on where you are in the world. And this is a tool that can help you, I feel, greatly when you are exposing your images when you're shooting video. Now, what I'm going to talk about are a few different ways that you can use this feature in your productions. What's nice about zebras is they can give us information having to do with a specific luminance value. So if I go into my shoot menus here and we go over to shoot 7, you can see this is where I'll find my zebra settings. I'm going to turn my zebras on. And then we have the option to view just zebra pattern 1, zebra pattern 2, or both together. I tend to just look at one or the other when I am looking for certain luminance values between my blacks and my whites in the image. And the other thing to note here is that for your zebra 1 level, you can go all the way down to 5 with a plus minus 5% variation, and all the way up to 95%. And then for zebra 2 level, I can go all the way down to 50. You cannot go below 50, and all the way up to 100%, but these are absolute values. So for instance, whether we're using Canon Log or not when we're recording, if I set my zebra 2 level to 90%, and then went over to my zebra pattern and wanted to view zebra pattern 2, then as soon as I started to increase my exposure or more light came into the camera, and I'll just do that with ISO right now, what you will see is that at a certain point, the zebra pattern will show up here in that white on the chart, and that's telling me that I'm now hitting 90% in terms of my luminance values, and I might want to back off there or definitely not go above 90%, so I make sure that I'm not clipping my highlights. So that's one way we can use zebras. Another way we could use zebras, and we'll just leave zebra 2 on for now. You could also use your zebras here if you wanted to make sure you were setting to a specific value for highlight showing up on skin tone. So depending on the person, and if they have lighter or darker skin tone, you may set that slightly differently. But it's just to give you an indication that you might be hitting skin tone values that are getting a little bit too hot. And then I'm going to back out here and choose zebra 1 because that allows me to go below 50%. So I'm going to actually set this to 50 right now for my zebra 1 pattern. And you can see it's plus minus 5%, but it's right in that ballpark. And as I showed you before, I am shooting right now using picture styles. So if I come out here and I have my zebra set to 50, then as I start to adjust my exposure here on the image, and you can see this, we start to see those zebras show up at a particular value. And you can see here, in this case, based on how much light is hitting my gray card that's in front of the camera, it's at around 1600. If I go here and just go another third of a stop, you'll see that we're really starting to see those zebras on the gray card. And that's telling me that my exposure of that gray card is at about 50% in terms of my luminance values. And that's about where I'd want them to be if I was using picture styles, give or take. The trick is to just make sure you're looking at your histogram or you're looking at those other zebras and you're making sure you're not clipping your highlights. Now, the other thing that I do want to mention is that when you are using a gray card for exposure, the direction that that gray card is pointed does have a lot to do with whether or not you're getting accurate readings based on your zebras or your histogram. So for instance, on this image right here, the light is actually side keying this little still life. So I do not have that gray card pointed directly to the camera lens. I have it between the camera lens and my key light to give me the exposure that's really falling on that still life right now. Of course, more is falling on the left side of the image than the right side of the image, but generally overall it's a side key. If I was keying more frontal, if it was beauty light or I was using clamshell lighting and it was a little flatter, I would turn that gray card a little bit towards the camera and that would give me a more accurate reading based on the type of lighting that I had. So you can see here when I have that gray card and it's directly pointed at the lens when I am side keying or light's coming from the side, that when I start to increase my ISO in this situation, that those zebras are going to show up at a higher exposure than when I have that gray card pointed in the right direction. Now, if I go back into the menus here and I turn Canon Log on, then we'll see a big shift in terms of our histogram here on the screen. We're protecting our shadows and our highlights. And we also have to make some changes in terms of our zebras if we want to use those for exposure. So I'm going to go into my settings here. And because we're shooting with Canon Log, my experience has been that generally I'm going to set my zebras to about 40% plus minus 5%. Sometimes I'll go as high as 45%, but 40 is really that sweet spot for me when I'm exposing for log with the camera. One of my favorite features on the R5 and the R6 is the focus guide, and this comes from the Canon Cinema EOS products. So I'm going to go into AF2, second page of the AF menu, and you'll see that feature there. I'm going to go in and turn this on. And in order to use this feature, you need to make sure that your camera is set to manual focus. So I'm going to go ahead and change that. And then you'll see this little box show up on your screen. Now, just as a note, this focus guide feature can be used with manual focus lenses that do not have AF capability, as long as those lenses have contacts and they're passing data to the camera in regards to distance. So this is a third-party lens. I'm using an EF to RF mount adapter, and it will in fact allow me to use the focus guide feature. Now, one other little tip here, because by default, with at least the version of the firmware I have, I can tap in different places on the screen to move that focus guide. If you want to change its position using the joystick on the back of the camera, we're going to go into our menu system and go over to Custom Function 3. We're going to go to Customize Buttons. And then when you go into this menu, it's split into two sides. The left side are customizing buttons for stills mode on the camera, and the right side is for movie or video. So we're going to scroll down here, and we are going to find the icon for that particular joystick or the multifunction controller. I'm going to go over here to the right column where we are changing it for movie mode. I'm going to turn on our direct AF point selection and then step out of the menu. And now I can move that box around using the joystick as well. And we have almost 100% coverage here of our image. So it's a really great feature. And all I have to do is once I have a particular point selected, I'm going to just reach over to my focus ring on the lens and start to change focus. And what I want you to do is take a look at those arrows. If those arrows are on the top and to the outside, what I need to do is I need to turn my lens to the right to get focus on that particular point. And then you'll see that as soon as those arrows come together with the bottom arrow, we'll get a green indication that we're in focus. Now, if it was the other way and you see the bottom arrows on the outside, then I'm going to turn the lens to the left to make sure that I get focus. And you'll see here that we have a lot of gray, so it's having a hard time latching onto it. So it's really a feature where you're going to need to have some contrast in the image. And you'll see that when I move that box around to, let's say here, and now I'm going to go ahead and turn the lens to the left because of the position of the arrows. Now I know that I am tack sharp in terms of my focus. So a fantastic feature to use with the R5 and the R6. If you're using native RF mount lenses with the R5 and the R6, there is something called the control ring at the front of your lens, and it is programmable. So we're going to take a look at that right now. We're going to go into custom function 3. So this is our third page of our custom function menu. We're going to go into customize dials. And then if I go down here to my fourth option, you'll see control ring, set. And you can see that I can make that control ring do many, many things. So depending on what you want that control ring to do, you can program it to do that. I'm actually going to go ahead and have it change aperture. You can see that it says to hold down the meter button, which is this button right here on the back of the camera when you're using this feature. So I'm going to go ahead and set OK, step out of this, and I'm going to hold that button down and use the control ring here, and you'll see that as I'm dialing it, I'm actually changing the aperture. Now there's one other little tip that I can give you, especially when you're assigning this to aperture with the lens. We're going to go back into the menu system. We're going to go over to our setup menus, and we're going to go over here to the second menu, shoot to. I'm going to go down to AV 1/8 stop increments, and I'm going to go ahead and enable that on the lens. And because I have my aperture assigned to the control ring, I am no longer changing my aperture only in generally 1/3 of a stops. I'm doing it in 1/8 of a stop increments. And that's just going to give me more granular or fine controls. So using the control ring with something like that 1/8 stop increment in terms of your aperture can give you very fine control in terms of the exposure of your image, and also allow you to make little adjustments without there being big changes in terms of your image when you're in production. The next thing we're going to take a look at, which also pertains to both the R5 and the R6, is auto ISO. And when I show you this feature, I would say, at least for me personally, this is something that I use sparingly. It's for run and gun. So there's a number of ways you can change your ISO on your camera. I'm just going to use the touchscreen. I'm going to go over here, swipe to the right, and go to auto, and then step out of there. And then as I'm starting to make changes, let's say for instance, I change my aperture, you can see here that the camera incredibly quickly is making changes to our exposure. So that auto ISO is very, very quick. It would also pertain to changing your shutter speed. And you can see here that it is just keeping the exposure where it is. So very, very fast. The other thing to remember when you're using auto ISO is to go into the Shoot To menu, ISO speed settings, and to make sure that you're setting your maximum ISO amount. So based on your shooting scenario and your experience with the camera, you'll have to set this to a maximum amount. And again, for me personally, I'm using auto ISO sparingly, but there will be times where it will be to your advantage to use that, especially when you're running and gunning and shooting in conditions which are unpredictable. Another useful feature in the R5 and the R6 is the ability to add metadata to your file when you are recording vertical video. So if we go into setup 1, you'll see that there's an add movie rotate info option. So when I go in here and I enable this, and this can be applied to any video captured except for, as you can see here, RAW or RAW plus MP4. So if I now take this off and I'm shooting with the camera in vertical video like this, that metadata is being added to the recorded file that I am recording right now. And then when I take this image and I bring it into my NLE in post-production, for instance, Premiere Pro or Final Cut Pro 10, it will see that metadata and it will automatically set up my timeline for me, if I so choose it to do that, in that 9:16 aspect ratio, which can actually save you quite a lot of time in post. Another feature that may be useful to you in certain situations is the self-timer. So we're gonna go into our menu under Shoot 6. You'll see Movie Self-Timer. We have 10 seconds and 2 seconds. I don't know how useful the 2-second option is gonna be unless the only reason you're trying to do it is get away from a rig and you want to minimize camera shake or something like that. But to me, in most situations, if you're going to use a self-timer, I would say 10 seconds would make the most sense. You're going to go ahead and set that. And now once it's active, every time you press record, it's going to go ahead and activate that self-timer. And you'll see that counting down there. This might also be useful if you wanted to get yourself into a shot after you frame it out. And once it starts recording, you'll stop hearing those sounds and you'll see up there on the top right that is in fact recording to the camera. So the next thing we're going to talk about is overheating control with the camera system. And there are definitely situations when you're shooting with the R5 and also sometimes with the R6 when you're in higher frame rates, where you can run into situations where your record times will be minimized and the camera can actually hit a ceiling and overheat. And this is especially true when you're shooting in 8K and also in 4K when you're shooting in higher frame rates, 60 frames or above, and that includes your high-speed recording options, and also if you are on the R5 using the 4K HQ mode. So when you're shooting with the camera in those scenarios, there is an option in the menu which has to do with overheating control. And if I hit info, you'll see that there's a screen that comes up that gives you some information related to what this overheat control feature is doing. Basically, you just have to note that your standby image quality may differ from your recorded image quality, meaning your recorded image quality will be full quality. And the display may not be updated right away when movie recording begins. And then as you can see here, we can see that overheating warning show up. And right now I have the camera set up to record in 8K all-eye, and that's definitely one of the settings that will reduce the amount of time you have to record with the camera. I'm actually going to go in right now and change that to the way I normally record with the camera. So I'm going to go over here and set that to 4K UHD 23.98, and in most situations I'm recording in IPB. And when I switch that over now, you'll see that we no longer have that warning on the camera. So you just have to manage this carefully when you're using, again, those higher resolutions, those high frame rates, and the 4K HQ mode on the R5, and you're getting into that higher frame rate recording on the R6. The last thing we're going to talk about in this video is extracting still images from your movie or video recordings with these cameras. And the big difference is that with the R5, we can extract those stills from 4K and 8K recordings. And with the R6, because the camera does not have 8K recording, you can extract those stills from your 4K recordings. Now, a big note here, this does not work when you have Canon Log turned on. And if you are using HDR-PQ, it's recording in a format that may not be recognizable by your NLE or by a program that you're using. So generally what I would recommend is if you're recording in 4K or 8K and you want to extract a lot of stills from those images, what you'll do is you'll have Canon Log off because you can't extract them anyway. You'll have HDR PQ off, and then what you'll be doing is extracting JPEGs from those recordings. Also remember that when you're recording video, you're not shooting generally with high shutter speeds. So finding those frames may be a little bit trickier because when you're shooting at a 50th or a 60th, you want to have generally clean frames as references from what you're shooting. This can be great when you're scouting. This can be great for when you're creating lookbooks and things like that. And instead of having to extract those in a timeline, you can do it right here in camera. So we're going to go in here and we're recording in a 4K resolution right now, 4K UHD. And I'm going to go in here and let's just go ahead and we'll just pan the camera. And I'm going to press record. So we are now recording some footage and I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to press play to play back my clip, set. And then we're going to go ahead and take a look at this clip. I'm going to go ahead and press play, find a frame that I might want to extract. Let's see that one. And you can see over here on the right, my last option is frame grab. And I'm going to choose that, save as a new still. And then once I do that, it will generate a still image. And I can go back to my original movie or view the extracted still. And you can see on the bottom right there that we see JPEG. And if I just then use my dial on the back of the camera, I'm now basically in playback. So you can see there's the original video clip, there's the extracted JPEG image. And again, like I said before, that's where we can run into issues related to shutter. You can see that it's a little bit blurry. So I might want to go back here, play that movie again, and wait till I settle in terms of my shot. So let's see that, and the AF kicks in, and I'm going to go back here and get another frame grab, and it's going to generate a new file. It's now 0030 instead of 0029. They're both being saved. There's the new frame grab, the first frame grab, and of course, my original movie. So that's an overview of some of the special video options and features in both the R5 and R6 cameras, and hopefully that will help you going forward with your productions. The goal here is always education, so I hope you learned something in this video. Thanks for watching.